I wanted to bring today's episode to the podcast talking about psoriasis and the link to infertility. We see a lot of people that are dealing with skin issues, be it psoriasis or hives or rashes, and they're also dealing with infertility. So I wanted to dig deeper with this podcast, talking about the functional approach to this, looking at functional testing, looking at gut health, looking at potential food sensitivities, looking at environmental stress and also mental emotional stress, and digging into really why this has happened in the first place. And a lot of times, if you've gone to a dermatologist, really you could be given creams or medication to help with this diagnosis, and really being told that maybe you just have to live with it. And it can be very frustrating. So when we're taking a functional approach, and especially if you're dealing with infertility as well, there's ways for us to look at this completely differently. I know you're going to love this. So if this is something that you're struggling with, or if you are struggling with an autoimmune disease as well, this episode is really important for you to dig into. And we talk about the functional approach and how this can really help you prepare your body for a baby, really taking right now these 6 months at least to focus on your preconception health. Because if there's something that's found in there, it is very difficult to do this while you are pregnant. So taking the time now to focus on your preconception health. So thanks so much for listening, and feel free to leave a review on iTunes. Hey there, I regularly speak with 5 to 10 couples per week who are struggling to have their baby. And although we want to help everyone, we only have 2 spots available per month to work with us. So the Supercharge Your Fertility Discovery call is for action takers, and really people who are ready to move forward so they can finally have their baby. And if you're not ready and you wait, the risk is you'll need to wait 2 to 3 months for a spot to open up. So if you're seriously considering working with us, go to FabFertile, FabFertile.com, and click on book a free call. Then you'll be all booked in and ready to spend 30 minutes to give you the action plan to getting pregnant naturally. That's FabFertile, FabFertile.com, and click on book a free call. Today's episode is sponsored by Shop AIP, and they are an online grocery store that specializes in anti-inflammatory products. And I have ordered their snack attack bundle, which has some awesome snacks. A lot of our couples, they travel a lot, and especially making these diet changes and moving to an autoimmune protocol diet, so AIP diet, can be difficult when you're traveling. So having these little snack items available in your purse or in your bag, so you don't go into that like hangry mode or just kind of running around and then you're eating something that's not going to be making you feel very good and going off the restrictions. And also they have a lot of gluten-free options, dairy-free, really whatever your dietary restriction is, you just enter it in and they're going to give you some awesome options for you to try. And yeah, the stuff is really good. So definitely check them out at Shop AIP. And I have got a 10% discount for you. So you just go into when you go to the checkout, just in the coupon section, in the promo section, you just put Get Pregnant Podcast and you get 10% off. So that's shopaip.com.
It's not just that you have psoriasis. It's not just that you have an autoimmune disease. And it is important to know that psoriasis is an autoimmune disease. But underneath all of that, there are 16 root causes that tend to drive skin rash conditions.
Welcome to Get Pregnant Naturally, where functional medicine and natural fertility solutions will help you get pregnant and have your baby. Hey everyone, I'm Sarah Clark, and my mission is to inspire, motivate, and empower you. Most of all, I want you to wake up. So with functional medicine, we can discover what causes infertility and eventually reverse the condition. Today, I'm welcoming Jennifer Fugo to the podcast, and we're digging into skin rashes and the link to infertility. Jennifer Fugo is a clinical nutritionist empowering women who've been failed by conventional medicine to beat chronic skin and unending gut challenges. Because she's overcome a long history of gut issues and eczema, Jennifer has empathy and insight to help her clients discover missing pieces and create doable integrative plans. Simply put, Jennifer believes that you deserve better. That's why she's launched SkinTerrupt.com to interrupt the failed conversation about chronic skin problems with helpful alternatives that aren't being told about. She has a master's degree in human nutrition from the University of Bridgeport and is a certified nutrition specialist. Her work has been featured on Dr. Oz, Reuters, Yahoo, CNN, and many podcasts and summits. Jennifer is an Amazon best-selling author and the host of the Healthy Skin Show. And before we jump into today's show, Don't forget to hit the subscribe button on iTunes or wherever you're listening to this to make sure you never miss an episode. Hey, Jennifer, excited to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate having this conversation, number one, because as I was sharing with you before this chat, a lot of people don't want to talk about what we're going to talk about today. And I think it's important for people struggling with psoriasis to know that there are other options, but there's definitely some heads ups that you should be aware of.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so if you could share your journey as to how you came to this work, I think you have quite an interesting journey.
Yeah. So I ended up in the whole skin rash realm because I ended up with skin rashes. I developed dyshidrotic eczema back in 2014 when I was in grad school. And I had a really rough time because it affected the palms of my hands. So pretty much everything that I touched and interacted with, as far as my hands were concerned, became incredibly painful. I couldn't open doorknobs. I couldn't go to the gym because I couldn't touch anything, let alone hold weight. And I couldn't wash my hands afterwards because it wasn't even soap, but water burned so badly. I was wearing these like blue gloves that I would buy from Home Depot to keep my hands covered and protected. So I didn't have to wash them as often, and I couldn't wash my hair. So, I mean, those are just some of the issues that I dealt with. And I became very frustrated with the dermatologist, feeling like, why is this, which is steroid creams and maybe some other pharmaceutical agents and like Vaseline, why is this all that we have in this day and age? I couldn't understand that no matter which way I asked the questions. Well, she was very happy that I was already gluten-free, dairy-free, and egg-free, and I had been for 6 years. So it's important to know that I had developed this condition out of the blue, essentially, despite having been on a pretty clean diet, a fairly clean home environment. So, we use a lot of organic products, very clean cleaning products, body care products, etc. It was sort of a shrug. Like, I don't know what to tell you. I think you're just going to have to live with this. Like, we don't know why this happens. And to me, that was one of the most upsetting, hope-stealing experiences because it felt like it was just this death sentence. And like, why me? Did somebody put the evil eye on me? Was I cursed? Did I do something in my former life that would have caused me to get this bizarre condition, this dyshidrotic eczema? And so I began looking and digging online. I tried a bunch of things that were suggested from a more alternative perspective. Some kind of worked. And eventually I started to think about it, thanks to my husband's inspiration, from a different perspective. And so over the course of a year, I worked on a bunch of different things. Some had to do with balancing my blood sugar and dealing with stress management and improving my diet and nutrient status and working on my digestive system as well. And over that time, I was actually able to reduce the flares and eventually get the eczema to stop. I have had a couple of very tiny flares over the past couple of years, but it's nothing that was major. And I was able to get it to go away within a couple of days of it even emerging. But that said, I realized that there were so many people who were stuck in this. It's like almost like that mouse wheel? You're running and you're trying and doing all these things and you just don't feel like you're getting anywhere. And the answers that you're getting are sort of, I don't know, they don't inspire you. They don't give you other options or opportunities to explore with your health. And so I began working with clients as I began sharing more and more of the information that I uncovered about what really drives chronic skin rashes like eczema and psoriasis. What I have found, and as I continue to research, is just truly astounding. And I think even to some degree, even from a functional perspective, there's still a lot of question marks that are not being taught or shared. And there's a lot of frustration, especially around psoriasis. But I think as we get to understand some of the key pieces to what drives psoriasis, for example, you can start to see a real improvement in health. I'm not going to claim that anyone's going to get psoriasis free. In fact, I don't even say that I'm eczema free because I know darn well that I have to pay attention to my body and I need to keep certain things in check. But you can make improvements and see a decrease in inflammation and markers across the board. And so I'm really excited to share this with everybody because I think we have the right to know what exactly is driving a lot of these problems so you can do something about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And thanks for sharing that. And the reason I wanted to have you on the podcast is to really talk about, because a lot of people that are coming to us, obviously everyone listening to this podcast is trying to get pregnant. and they may have these other seemingly unrelated issues going on. And many people that come to me have psoriasis and they're struggling with infertility. If we can dig into some of the hidden causes for this, and really, why would it even matter for us to have this conversation right now about someone struggling with infertility and psoriasis?
Well, there's a number of things that I uncovered, and the fact that it's not just that you have psoriasis. It's not just that you have an autoimmune disease. And it is important to know that psoriasis is an autoimmune disease. But underneath all of that, there are 16 root causes that tend to drive skin rash conditions like psoriasis. And so one of the most common things we hear about is this connection between any type of autoimmune condition, including psoriasis, and the gut. And that is important. But here's how I sort of differentiate that. We have a microbiome on our skin. We also have a microbiome in our gut. And the gut, I like to think of it as almost like the captain of the microbiome ship. And so if we have dysfunction or dysregulation of some sort within that microbiome community, or we have infections, that can cause issues at the level of the skin. Now, you can also have something called gut dysfunction where maybe you don't have enough stomach acid, which I think we should definitely circle back to this. I don't want to go into it too deep right now, but not having enough stomach acid is really critical, especially when it comes to psoriasis. So low stomach acid, poor digestion, poor then absorption, those sort of gut dysfunction pieces can really throw things off, creating inflammation and other issues. There are certainly diet and food reactions that can contribute to these conditions, but it's one piece in a much grander scheme of things. And I think people have mistakenly thought that they should only focus on food and that diet will fix everything. And for some people, they do see massive improvements, but not for everyone. So that's why these other pieces are important, because ultimately, if you're not digesting and absorbing food, you end up with nutrient deficiencies. That then feeds into liver detoxification challenges. And I'm talking about the actual biochemical pathways in the liver, not just some like random detox term that we tend to use in the health industry. Trauma and unmanaged stress are certainly triggers. We can have genes with psoriasis that play a role. Thyroid dysfunction is a piece to this, hormone imbalances. Obviously, I mentioned autoimmunity, drug reactions. There are quite a few really interesting drug reactions in combination with psoriasis. The mitochondrial dysfunction, heavy metal toxicity, environmental toxins, and environmental allergies, things like pollen in the air, chemicals in your home, pet dander, that kind of thing. But that's the general list of what I have figured out in my clinical practice and through research so far of what really are root causes.
And yeah, and from a fertility space, we are seeing some of the similar things. And it's not just like focusing on the infertility or focusing on the psoriasis. It's like looking at the whole body, talking about the stressors, like you talked about, the environmental stressors, the gut infections, the food sensitivities. We see the thyroid dysfunction a lot, and obviously hormonal imbalance. And the drug reactions. Can you talk a little bit about that one?
Drug reactions are really interesting when it comes to psoriasis. And I do want to share that the reason that I even uncovered this is because someone wrote me 15 months ago asking me if I had known anything about blood pressure medications and them potentially triggering psoriasis. And I was like, I'm not really too sure, but I'll look into that. And so as I start digging, I actually came across a lot of information that there are medications that can trigger psoriasis, that can flare psoriasis, and even some medications specifically for psoriasis can trigger your psoriasis. The sort of more shortened list here is lithium, which we do sometimes use in more of like the functional integrative medicine for depression, but lithium can certainly play a role. Plaquenil, which people who have lupus may have heard of that because it tends to be used for lupus. There are a class of antibiotics called fluoroquinolones. That includes Cipro, for example, that there's an FDA warning in the United States about this class of drugs. They can also trigger psoriasis. tetracycline, which I took a lot as a teenager for my acne, that there's certain antifungals, certain blood pressure medications like beta blockers, ACE inhibitors, and angiotensin receptor blockers. And then also too, just to kind of add to that, it's not just blood pressures. Like beta blockers can also include glaucoma medications like timolol. So they're drops that you would put in your eyes to help control your eye pressure. Interferons, biologics like Remicade and Humira, NSAIDs like ibuprofen and Motrin, and then even topical steroids.
So quite a list there to dig for someone to dig into there. Wait a minute, saying if that is potentially a trigger, but it's like, oh wait, yeah, it is like being that detective, right? Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And here's the thing. You don't hear a lot about this. And unfortunately, doctors don't always tell you, because a lot of times they'll say, well, the risk is so super small. Why would it matter? It maybe affects 1% or 2%, but the risk doesn't feel that great when you are the person that it impacts. Oh, yeah. And then you're stuck with this issue where all of a sudden your skin's going crazy and you can't figure out why. So it's not just about what you're taking now. I think that's an important point here. I always ask people, like, what is your history with medications? And I will add to this that while these don't necessarily trigger psoriasis, I do think you should consider them if they're in your past, because I assume, especially because we're talking about pregnancy, that we're mostly talking to women here, but I'm sure there's some men that listen. But if you have a history of birth control pill use and antibiotics, even if it was like when you were a baby or a kid, you need to write all of those down, because they change and impact your microbiome. And those changes can have huge, it's like dropping a stone into a water, and you have initially these little ripples, but eventually they spread out and become larger. So we do see an impact, and you can start to piece together a picture when you put together all of these different drug exposures over time, just to understand how you got here.
Yeah, I'm regularly seeing people that have been on hormonal birth control, and then experiencing those when we were looking at those nutrient deficiencies, as well as the food sensitivities / gut infections that can predispose you to. And then when I asked them kind of, did you go on it for prevention? And a high percentage, like in over 80%, would tell me they went on because of acne, PMS, irregular heavy periods. And then when they're coming off now, now they're struggling with infertility. And then the antibiotics. And these are two things that I went on as well. I was diagnosed with premature ovarian failure. I had both my kids with donor eggs, and then I was given birth control. And then I started getting chronic yeast infections and bladder infections on all sorts of antibiotics, and became allergic to them all. And so for me, it did go to eczema. It didn't go to psoriasis. But definitely skin issues for me and a lot of people that we work with. So what's your take on food sensitivities triggering skin rash issues? So for you had already gone dairy, gluten, and egg-free 6 years prior. Then all of a sudden the eczema popped up. So what are you seeing with the food sensitivity side of things?
So I do not believe that food sensitivities are a root cause. When I was discussing previously, a few moments ago, the issues with diet and food interactions, yes, you can certainly have very specific food triggers, but the misunderstanding that's been perpetuated within, I'm going to say, the like integrative and functional medicine world, especially when you read a lot of these diet books that are specific to conditions, is that the food is probably one of your biggest culprits behind all of your symptoms and your woes. And so everyone orients themselves to basically fear food. And they're like, okay, well, if I take this out and I take that out and I take all this whole group over here out, I'm going to get better. And before you know it, the danger is that the diet becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. And then when they try to reintroduce a food or quote unquote cheat, they get a reaction. And so they go, oh my gosh, I'm developing more and more food sensitivities. So here's the deal. Food sensitivities are a symptom of a greater problem. They're a symptom of gut permeability, of an inflamed gut, of a gut that's really unhappy. And it just so happens that for whatever reason, those foods are either causing the immune system to be triggered because they are basically crossing over from it's funny, we think of the inside of our body as the inside, but it's not necessarily the inside. So the gut tube is really the outside of your body. And that's where food proteins that are not fully broken down need to stay. They need to be fully broken down to be absorbed. And when we have that state of leaky gut, which I'm sure you've talked about, those food proteins then cross into the body in an unnatural way. And your immune system's like, whoa, I don't know what that is. We need to do something about it because it has your best interest in mind. The other piece too is that sometimes when you have dysbiosis, for example, or even an infection within the gut, those food pieces can interact with the bacteria there. So you might not actually be sensitive to the food itself. It's just the way that it interacts with the microbiome. So to me, I look at that as, hey, let's figure out what the least amount of food restrictions you can possibly do. Try to get you eating more nutrient-dense foods, rather than fixating on the next food elimination will be your fix, because I've worked with people who have gotten themselves down to 5 foods and they don't feel any better. And it's a real disservice to, I'm going to just say, I think in being a practitioner, I think it's a real disservice to people to orient them to fear food, because there are so many other pieces to this that are critical. And I think this is a good opportunity too to explain what I was saying earlier about having enough stomach acid. And the reason that I say this is that this is a really cool thing about, well, it's cool, but it's probably not cool when you're going through it with psoriasis. So there was a really interesting paper that I came across that was published in 2018 by Dr. P. Haynes Eli. And what was interesting was he talked about these polyamines that are the result of the improper digestion of protein that you derive from food. So it doesn't matter whether it comes from plants or it comes from meat. It's just proteins, and they're digested by bacteria rather than you digesting them and you absorbing them. So essentially you're feeding gut bugs and making how I like to joke about it is very expensive poop. What happens here is that these polyamines, okay, they are called putrefaction factors because that's the process of fermenting protein. Doesn't sound good, and it's not good. And they're byproducts of bacteria that are munching on them in your digestive system. They're very inflammatory. And so what was interesting, Dr. Eli had shared, was that for a long time, researchers have known that psoriatic plaque contain different polyamines. And they thought that for whatever reason, that the skin was actually making them. And nobody ever put together that they're actually byproducts of what's found in the gut. And so the problem here is that when you don't properly digest and absorb the proteins, you again feed those gut bugs, the proteins ferment, and those putrefaction factors then cross over the gut barrier. And within an hour of eating, so this is a direct quote, within an hour, 50% of orally ingested polyamines from food are present in systemic circulation. So that means that those inflammatory factors that are a result of the poor digestion and the inability to absorb them are making their way into your system. And for whatever reason, they are then getting deposited in those psoriatic plaques. So it is critical that you have enough stomach acid to break proteins down and to pull the nutrients apart from the proteins. Like B12 is attached to protein in food. This also explains why there are people who will say that they actually notice that they become very sensitive to animal proteins and they do a lot better eating a plant-based diet. And part of the problem is that they're having a hard time breaking the proteins down. And we need to chew our food. I know this sounds very simplistic, but a lot of times in our busy lives, it's easy to eat on the go, to stand and to shovel food into your mouth because you got 5 minutes between, your one call and the next, or your kids or whatever. And we don't realize that our teeth are integral for breaking food down initially. You do not have teeth anywhere else in the gut. They're meant for more than just a pretty smile. They do serve a function. So it's important to chew your food properly. That helps increase stomach acid. And then things slowly move through. And if you're really having a hard time, what I found with my psoriatic clients is that adding in a full spectrum digestive aid, that does not mean just digestive enzymes. Enzymes are a different piece to the digestive process. Full spectrum enzyme aid that includes digestive enzymes, includes betaine HCl, and has bile in it as well. So we're making sure to break down fats. That oftentimes will help get a lot of the nutrients into the system because it's supporting that. And it may not be a forever thing, but it's critical to get that piece righted as soon as possible.
Yeah, and we see this. I've had this myself, and also with our clients too, with the stomach acid piece, and then also doing the food sensitivity test, having it come back. I've had this myself and our clients where it comes back, you're intolerant to all your favorite foods. And then you're like, holy shit, what am I going to eat? And it's like for someone that's, dedicated to eating a clean diet, quote unquote diet, it can be like disheartening when you're seeing, and then it becomes so restrictive. And then that's ridiculous. For me, it wasn't until I really looked at healing the gut was I able to actually eat, a better diet, because I got down to that, oh my goodness, what am I going to eat thing? And we see this, regularly with our clients as well, I'm sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And the same is true. And here's the thing, the first question that people will say is, I want to heal my gut. That's a really important thing I've read online. Healing the gut seems to be key. So I'm going to do a gut healing product. I'm going to, do these like L-glutamine and some of this other stuff. And I'm like, but you can't quote unquote heal the gut if you don't know what's causing the problem. So you have to identify what's causing the problem in the first place. You have to work on that. And then you go over to what I call gut resealing. Because if you start with gut resealing, I'm like, I don't know what you're doing because you missed the step. You have to identify what's wrong. And so what's really fascinating in my psoriatic clients is that we typically will run stool panels to look at the microbiome. And a lot of times people will come back with some serious dysbiosis. It's not uncommon to find an overgrowth of candida and other fungal organisms. And there are times where we do find excess levels of E. coli, Klebsiella, and other infections, and even parasites sometimes. H. pylori is also a pretty common thing to see in psoriasis. And if you have psoriatic lesions that are really itchy, there is some research that indicates that the itchiness is actually coming from these hidden infections, things like blasto and H. pylori. So it's critical that you know what the heck's going on in the gut, not just like, I'm going to take this product to reseal my gut. It'll be good. And then you're like, it didn't work. Well, it didn't work because the trigger's still there.
It's a waste of money. Yes. Test, don't guess. We see this all the time with our clients. The majority of people we work with, there's something going on in the gut, and we use the GI map test looking at, there's parasites or bacterial infections, fungal infections, H. pylori, which is passed back and forth between couples. Routinely blasto. So all these things you're talking about. So it can be applied to infertility, or also if you obviously have psoriasis or hives or any other thing going on in the body. And as far as nutrient deficiencies, so we're seeing this regularly. So what are you seeing with people that are dealing with psoriasis?
Across the board, 100% of my clients, and I'm just going to say this because I think it's worth, if people had asked me like, what nutrients and how often do you see nutrient deficiencies? And I went back through my cases and I'm like, every single one, every single case. It doesn't matter what skin condition they have. It could be dandruff. It could be tinea versicolor. It could be rosacea, it can be eczema, psoriasis. It doesn't matter. They all come back with some level of nutrient deficiencies. It does vary. I'm pretty common one to see is vitamin A with skin issues. Vitamin A is really important for your skin. It's not uncommon to see low levels of ferritin as well, low levels of magnesium. And here's the thing, when you're looking at different minerals like magnesium and zinc. Zinc is also really important for your skin. You want to look at the red blood cell or erythrocyte values because that tells us what the cells have access to. The serum values, or if it just says zinc, magnesium, and a lot of times some of them will show up in your comprehensive metabolic panel. That's not actually helpful because it's floating around in the blood. We want to know what the cell actually has access to. Vitamin D is commonly low. You just want to be careful with supplementing vitamin D to make sure that, there isn't a reason why vitamin D supplementation could be contraindicated. And sometimes that can be the result of, it's called the cell danger response. And basically what that means is that the cell is in a state where we don't want to provide it any more vitamin D. So it's sort of a mechanism for the body to protect itself. So cell danger response is a real thing. And one interesting way that you can test for that, and I'm not an expert on that by any means. There are definitely other people that talk about this, and I've been learning more and more about it. But looking at the comparison between the two types of vitamin D markers, can be really, really helpful. I know a lot of times we sort of like blow them off, but comparing 25 hydroxy vitamin D to 125 D-hydroxy vitamin D can actually be really helpful to understand, is it a true deficiency or is this a mechanism for the cell to be like, whoa, stop, we're actually doing something to protect the body. It's not uncommon to see low B12, low folate. I also love to look at homocysteine. It's not a direct marker of a nutrient per se, but it's part of the methylation cycle. And homocysteine is also a really helpful functional B6 marker, because sometimes we need B6 for a lot of things. And this brings up a critical point. In folks with psoriasis, it is not uncommon to see liver enzymes off the charts, really unhappy, high levels. Your doctor's then concerned that there are liver problems going on. They may even look for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And there is a connection between those two, unfortunately. And so one thing that I like to do is, you've got to support those liver enzymes, especially with B6. That's what they require as a cofactor to do their job. And then also too, potentially considering then what can we do to support phase 2 detoxification, because we want to get the toxic material that's just hanging out between phase 1 and phase 2 processed and out of the body. Otherwise, we start to see a backup. And so feeding the system so that it can support phase 2. That doesn't mean doing a detox or a liver cleanse, okay? Because that actually puts more stress on your liver. We want to give it what it needs to operate appropriately so that we can support not just the liver, but also while you do work on the gut, because toxins are going to be released as you are rebalancing the bug community, as we bring in antimicrobials, antifungals, etc. And this gives the liver the support that it needs to deal with basically everything that's coming its way from that process in the gut.
Yeah, so vitamin A, ferritin, magnesium, vitamin D, homocysteine, giving into that, looking at potential liver enzymes, which you're seeing high with psoriasis. We see regularly the vitamin D low, magnesium, which had Dr. Carolyn Dean on the podcast talking about magnesium. Over 85% of us are deficient. And I had those eye twitches, leg cramps, and my feet swelling, all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, oh my goodness, without magnesium. Yeah, so that's really been a game changer for me. So to be able to supplement with that. And yeah, I did a hair tissue mineral analysis test, came back, all my mineral, every time I do a test, I'm like, oh God, I'm a perfect case study because I'm a disaster, but I'm working to improve. Yeah, I was low on a bunch of these minerals and the vitamin A and the magnesium and a bunch of other ones. And so really kind of taking that targeted approach. Now, are you just looking at blood markers or like blood chem? Or are you doing a specific test for the nutrient deficiencies? What are you using there?
So I use a combination of conventional lab and a functional lab. Usually it'll be an organic acid panel, so a urine test. The reason that I found that it's very important to do both is that if you've had an organic acid panel run, you may find that, for example, from a functional perspective, it looks like B12, there's not enough B12 because methylmalonic acid, for example, is elevated or high. That might not be the case. I've actually found, and I'm really glad that I do this now, I will request that the family doctor or whomever, they'll go get their serum B12 levels. And there have been about 35 to 40% of the time, the person's B12 is really high, which can be a sign of either oversupplementation or they're having liver issues, or if it's really high. I mean, clinical research shows that if your serum B12 level is up above 1250 and with no supplementation, then you need to look at serious liver dysfunction and even potential like hematologic issues. I don't want to say the C word, but you got to take that seriously. So in that instance, you don't want to hand them more B12 simply because the organic acid test is saying methylmalonate is high. So it is important to correlate some of these values with serum values and to not assume that because somebody has a deficiency on one panel means that you got to really compare the two. They both offer value. And I always share that with clients. I'm like, look, I know it seems redundant, but they look at the same picture from a different perspective. And together you get a better full picture of what's going on. That way we have more nuance, but it is important to really look deeply. Like I said, I mean, CoQ10 is another one that's really important. Sometimes people are deficient in that, and also protein. I know that you weren't asking specifically about that, but it is very common for me to see clients that are not just simply not eating enough protein with all of these. And I'm not I'm not saying this in any way, shape, or form with any disrespect to anybody that eats more of a plant-based diet or anything. I have very deep respect for anybody's choice of how they choose to eat. That's not my job to judge you or anything. However, there has been this way in which a lot of like documentaries about health have misguided people into thinking that they need like to eat almost no protein, and that very like plant-based sources, which some do have good sources of protein in them, but they'll say, oh, well, you can eat kale. And kale will give you enough protein. Well, 2 cups of kale is 4.5 grams of protein. Well, okay, so 4.5, that sounds great. That sounds good. Well, here's the problem. If you've got a chronic illness, okay, so psoriasis, for example, is a chronic illness. You need more protein than the regular person because your body is, number one, it's under a state of stress. Stress uses up protein because we need proteins to build our neurotransmitters. We also need proteins to build our thyroid hormone because tyrosine is a necessary piece. We also need proteins to build our enzymes. This is all before you even get to muscle mass and tissue, right? So to say that someone doesn't need to eat that much protein is really misleading because a lot of the people watching these are people who are ill. And so they end up cutting back even on plant-based protein, whereas I found just in my clinical practice that someone should eat, and this is a person who's not super active. You're not going to work out, 2 hours a day. You're not competing for CrossFit. This is a normal, everyday person, maybe even somebody who's just really not well. You should be consuming at least 70 to 80 grams of protein a day. So how exactly on 2 cups of kale per meal are you going to get there? That's going to be rough. And so there are better ways to do it. Like a half a cup of whole almonds is 15 grams. But, people say, well, I have 1 egg for breakfast. 1 egg is 6 grams. So you really need to look hard and long at your diet. And protein is a really critical piece, especially if you get pregnant, you need protein in order to build this new human being. And it's critical to make sure that you're getting enough. Otherwise, you're just not going to have enough available to you in order to make your body run properly. And in that moment, you have to think about like, what am I doing? Well, I'm on a healing journey. My healing journey requires more nutrient than the person that's just out there super duper healthy and they're like 22 and they're feeling great and yada, yada, yada. That's not you. That's not you. You are where you are and you got to meet your body where you are so you can love and support it based on where it is so that you can help it thrive. So be careful of that. Be careful of cutting back on your protein intake.
I love that. And so some favorite foods that you recommend for anyone that's struggling with psoriasis or skin rashes?
Well, I would say for sure omega-3 rich foods are very helpful. Things like ground flaxseed are great. I would say if you could do like 1 to 2 tablespoons a day of ground flaxseed, has to be ground, not whole. You can add them to protein shakes as well. I would just caution you if you do struggle with diarrhea, that's probably not going to work for you because it's going to make things worse. But ground flax is great. Wild caught salmon and other cold water fishes are fantastic. If you can tolerate walnuts, the raw walnuts can be also very helpful. Fish oils can be extremely helpful as well. I would say that even just for a normal suggestion, you probably want to look for, and this is not a therapeutic dose, by the way, and if you're getting into therapeutic levels, you should really work with a practitioner, but at least getting probably about like 1 gram or 1,000 milligrams of omega-3s a day, if you are taking a supplement, would probably be a good idea. Collagen is an excellent thing to include in your diet. You want to look for brands that contain types 1 and 3. Those types of collagen are the ones that are most integral for skin and your digestive system and joints. Ghee, because it has actually a high concentration of butyrate, which I touched on the microbiome, but your bugs are supposed to ferment fiber and they produce other factors that are healthy for you, like butyrate. And butyrate is a great connector or a connection signal essentially between the microbiome in the gut and the skin. So adding in some ghee can also be really helpful. It does remove the sugars and proteins from butter. So that way it's more tolerable to most people. Beets can be really great. Although if you do have psoriasis and you're taking methotrexate, I would actually not do beets. Because there can be a food drug interaction between the two. Gluten-free oats can also be helpful. Beta-glucans are really, really helpful for skin. And the last one, this is more specific to autoimmune skin issues, you might want to do some looking or digging into reishi. Reishi is a type of medicinal mushroom. And there is some preliminary case studies that have shown where reishi, because of its immunomodulatory benefits, can be helpful for these types of conditions. So that might be something else to consider, whether you're taking it as sort of a tincture, and there's a lot of different companies out there. You're doing like reishi coffee. There's all sorts of mushroom coffees.
Yeah.
Yes. But also sometimes you can be helped by using reishi infused like soap. And there are a few out there on the market that are available that may be helpful as well. So those would be my main things. But I'd definitely say if you have not gone gluten-free yet, definitely go gluten-free. At the bare minimum, clean up your diet, go gluten-free because it reduces gut permeability. And the other thing for psoriasis, this was according to a 2017 psoriatic study. They did find that removing nightshades, about 52% of people saw an improvement in their symptoms. You know, I'm sort of on the fence. I feel like it really stinks to remove foods, but if you're stuck, that might also be something to test out for a month and see how you do if you try to remove nightshades.
Mm-hmm. Love it. Okay. As far as the skin microbiome and how it communicates with the gut flora, we talked a little bit about that. Anything else you wanted to share there?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Your skin is a lipidome. That's what it's called because it loves fat. The bacteria there consume fat, not like the bacteria in the gut where they consume and they want to consume fiber. So that's a really key piece of like what you're putting on your skin. And so as far as the communication piece there, like I was saying, butyrate and some of these other bacterial byproducts like acetate, propionate are really important to establish that healthy, it's almost like the anchor for the skin microbiome. You know, what you put on your skin does matter. And there's a few things that you can try that can also help from an outside in and inside out approach, right? So we talked a lot about the inside out. What can you do on the outside in? Some people have had some interesting and varying reports about, you know, using coconut oil, which I'm not a big fan of. I think it's better to opt for things like olive oil or jojoba oil, for example. Jojoba is actually the closest thing to human sebum. I've actually had some really interesting luck, and I don't have any data to back this up. So I'm just like sharing my clinical experience here. But I did an interview with Dr. Peter Leo on the Healthy Skin Show, which is my podcast. And we're talking about CBD, and he was telling me about the interaction between CBD and the positive impact of CBD on the keratinocytes, which is a lot of what is affected within psoriasis. But we were talking about it under the context of eczema. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting because we do have this issue with the keratinocytes with psoriasis. And he was saying, and some of the research that he shared with me was showing how using CBD topically could actually help regulate in a healthful, positive way, those keratinocyte activity, so that they're functioning the way that they should be, or more so, rather than in a haywire manner. And so I started to get thinking about it, and I was like, well, I'm going to go back to my psoriatic clients and just like throw this idea out there and see if they want to give it a try of like massaging really high quality CBD oil into those lesions. What they found is that it actually is helping to soften the lesions. So like I have one client right now who has lesions on her scalp, and it's been really, really helpful. I mean, we've been working on a lot of other things. So this was sort of like the next step, but it has been helpful. And the important key is it has to be CBD oil that is very high quality. So wherever you get it from, I don't know what the regulations are in Canada, but in the United States, it's sort of still the Wild West. So you need to make sure you're getting it from a company that can show you a certificate that they have tested through a third party of what exactly is in that product. It has to have a base of hemp seed or olive oil, not coconut or MCT or fractionated coconut oil, no coconut, just hemp or olive. And no flavorings or additional herbs or anything added to it. Sometimes you can buy them and they taste like chocolate mint or whatever. You don't want that. You want something that's plain, super grassy. If you don't like taking it, then just use it on your skin topically. You can give that a shot. It can be really helpful for reducing inflammation. And like I said, I mean, I don't have any data to back it up as far as psoriasis right now. And I think we're still in the early stages, but that could also be a really helpful thing. And I just want to touch on one thing before we wrap up, because I know that you talk a lot about the gut. When people, and especially women, my female clients are thinking about getting pregnant, and I'm like, hey, okay, let's do like a stool panel. Let's figure out what's going on. It is important. I just want to stress this because I imagine you've already talked about this before, but your options do become limited. If you do have a gut infection, your options do limit down how much you can do once you're pregnant or when you're breastfeeding. So if you're thinking about getting pregnant and you have psoriasis and you're like, maybe I should look into this of what's going on, it's better to start sooner rather than later, because otherwise then it's more likely that you're going to have to wait until after you're done breastfeeding in order to deal with things. Because a lot of the antimicrobial herbs, there's no testing done in pregnancy and breastfeeding. And so there's a question of safety. You want to get yourself as healthy as possible. That way you're able to provide the most nutrients and the least stressed environment. And stress doesn't necessarily have to be like because of traffic or, bills or whatever. It can also be stress within the body environment itself for that little one to grow as healthful as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Taking a minimum of 6 months and doing it with your doing it with your partner to really, optimize your preconception health. I had Dr. Ben Lynch on, and he was talking to someone. It's like, why do we spend 12 to 18 months preparing for the wedding, and then 1 month we expect to get pregnant? Why can't we swap that around?
Yeah. And especially with psoriasis. I mean, this is an autoimmune disease. And so with that, like, you need to make sure it's more than just like, do I have enough folate? Am I taking the right prenatal? Like, you need to make sure that it's not just that you're taking a prenatal, that you actually have enough of those nutrients. And there are times, like if you have a B12 deficiency, or say you're even in the 300s with your B12, that's pretty close to low. And a lot of times people will start to have issues or see irregularities start to show up in their red blood cells as a result of that. And so you want to make sure that you are able to take enough and that it's absorbed, not just, oh, it's a really good prenatal, I'm going to take this. For a therapeutic dose of B12, it is significantly higher than what is in a regular prenatal. So it is critical that you get a lot of these nutrients. You want to identify what nutrients you're low in, that you have enough, because your body's going to be doing heavy lifting, and it needs the nutrients available to not just support you, but also your little one.
Absolutely. And can you just talk a little bit about the shame or negative feelings around people that are dealing with skin issues for a long period of time?
Yeah, I'll tell you this. I think that having gone through eczema was one of the most, I don't know, it really made me question what the heck I was even doing being alive. I never would have considered suicide because I fortunately have a really good support system around me. My dad's a doctor, and my husband's very understanding of health issues and whatnot. So I'm lucky from that respect, but I didn't know anybody else that was struggling. And I did feel a lot of shame in going out into the world, in interacting with people. And, with eczema, there are huge problems with suicidal thoughts, attempts at suicide, and even people that do manage to expire, unfortunately. And it's really sad that this is where this goes. And the same is the case for psoriasis. There's actually an increased risk in those who are younger. So we're looking at like 20 somethings compared to 60-year-olds. There's a 20% increased risk of suicide ideation, suicidal behaviors, attempts in suicide, as well as completed suicides. And the study that I found this in was in the Journal of American Academy of Dermatology. And so, you are not alone. I think it's really important, number one, to have a community of people around you that understand what you're going through. And if you can't find one locally, and I don't even know if there's psoriasis support groups locally or what, but like on the internet, there's a lot of opportunity to connect with other people that just at least understand what you're going through. That way you're not living your entire life in shame, and you have a place to vent and to share the experiences you go through. But I will also say this, I threw a lot out at everyone, like saying, okay, there's 16 root causes. That doesn't mean you have every single one of them. It means that you need to go through and identify whether you can figure it out on your own, or you need the help of a practitioner to go through that and figure out where the root causes are, and say, okay, This doesn't mean that I am doomed, but these are actually opportunities. These are windows opening for me to look through. Because the worst thing that can happen is when you're sitting there in the dermatologist office and they're just like, they shrug and they're like, I don't know what to tell you. You're just going to have to learn to live with this. And you're like, my life is awful. I can't go out in a bathing suit. I can't wear short sleeves. I can't wear pants. I can't do this, that, yeah. I'm living in pain. Like, it's easy to say that. It's a total different thing for a person to hear that when they're going through an experience that strips and steals away joy, little tiny even joys in life. I just want people to know there are so many other opportunities. And even if you're on medication now to support your skin health, like if you're on a biologic or you're using steroid creams or whatever, you can do a lot of these things in conjunction with the medications to help hopefully reduce your need for it and maybe even potentially down the road, possibly get off of it. But you have to want to do it. And you also have to keep in mind that this is a journey. You're not going to see a quick fix tomorrow, no matter what people promise on Instagram. It is a journey. There's nothing that you're going to take and 2 days later, it's going to magically be gone. If that happens to you, awesome. But for most of us, that's not realistic. And at the end of the day, I will say this, and I can't speak from the perspective of psoriasis, but I can say from the perspective of eczema, I am really grateful in looking back that this happened to me because it was an opportunity for me to reconnect with myself, to remember that I have to be my number one priority, because if I don't pay attention to me and my health, I can't support others in my life that I love, like my nieces, my parents, my husband, my friends, all my clients, and my community. So there are blessings in disguise. And when you start to see the silver linings, and even if they're small, even if it was just like, hey, I woke up today and somebody did something really kind for me, or I gave my dog a hug, and you just paused for that moment and really like loved that hug, because hugs are great. They help with oxytocin. And I think it's important to have animals and people around you that can support you through this. You're just not alone. And I just want people to know that you are so not alone. And there are some great people, even on Instagram, who I follow with psoriasis, who are incredibly inspiring. And I'm very lucky, even though I never had psoriasis, I love that I follow them, because even though I don't have that condition and I never have, what they share and their insight into living with this, I don't want to call it a disease. I think it's just like, it's a different way of life, is really incredible. And when we can see the positive, when we can see the steps and the little things that happen and the actions that we take, and we focus on that rather than like, how long is it going to take me to get to here? It shifts your perspective of life, and, in a really positive way. So see the opportunities and connect with people. I think those are the two really critical pieces to this.
Yeah. Take the time now to really mother yourself before you're bringing another child. And if you've got psoriasis, then sort of to deal with that now. And yeah, as you say, ask for support. It's sort of, for me too, is to look at those patterns when you're feeling frustrated, when it's like, it's not working. You're like, why aren't I better? To know that, like, to be really nice, kind to yourself instead of beating yourself up saying, what's going on here, because this is a journey. But you can see you can see results fairly quickly, but it's not like, it does take a while.
It does. And one just last point, I know we don't have to go into this at all, but it is important that you don't just focus on like, what supplements can I take? In the diet, it is stress, it is trauma. In the past, it could be something that happened as a kid. It could be like, there was an article I read of a woman who, she was a author, and her father suddenly died when she was 10. I think he was having a surgery, and it was not planned. He wasn't sick or anything, and he died. And that trauma stayed with her for many, many years into adulthood. So I would just say, don't discount the things that happened in the past, and take a moment and really start to identify things in your daily life that are also causing stress, no matter how small they are. Don't blow them off. And that's where you want to say, hey, what can I do? Is it breathing exercises? Is it mindfulness? Is it meditate? Because those pieces are just as important as a supplement you take or the food that you choose to eat. And you could eat a 100% great organic diet. You could eat AIP. You could do whatever you want on that and have the most toxic, awful thoughts going through your head. And you cannot cope with even the smallest thing that happens to you because you don't have that sense of resiliency from an emotional and mental perspective. And that could be one of the biggest pieces that you need to work on. So I just want to clarify that is equally important and should be something that, I like to have clients, I'm like, go through the day and write down everything that stresses you out. And you start to identify those little triggers, and awareness is always the first step to beginning to deal with them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Getting honest about the mental emotional stressors is key. Absolutely. Okay. Is there a book or a website or an app or a documentary, anything you're totally obsessed with right now I'd like to recommend?
I would say the one book that I'm really obsessed with right now is Daily Stoic. It's by, I think it's Ryan Holiday. And so Ryan Holiday and Stephen Hanselman. It was recommended to me by a friend of mine, and it's a short 1-page passage. It gives a little, food for thought, and then how it applies practically, and just helps me start my day. That's been a really nice book for me to just dive into and just think about, again, the mental piece, the emotional piece. How can I constantly put one foot in front of the other and just keep working on myself?
Love it. The Daily Stoic. And is there a success story you'd like to share with us? I'm sure you have lots.
Yeah. I will say that I have a client right now. She came to me late last year. No, actually it was the beginning of this year, because the reason is she had psoriasis, and she had done the Whole30 in January, thinking that it would help her digestion and make her feel better. And in fact, and this is not a slam at the Whole30, by the way. It just so happened that the Whole30 made her sicker, and she started developing pretty intense diarrhea, yellow stools, which is not good and is an indication that you're not absorbing fats. And so she just felt super fatigued, couldn't go work out anymore. And in fact, when she would work out, she would just get so tired and her legs would feel really heavy that she was like going to the gym less and less and putting on weight and just feeling increasingly fatigued with these really itchy lesions. And so we began working on different things, looked at the gut, found a lot of dysbiosis. She had a lot of nutrient insufficiency, and she certainly had issues absorbing nutrition. We got all of that righted. And while she's not 100% better, all of her other markers, so let's put the skin aside for a second. So energy level, focus, mood, all those daily life things, she's gotten back to an optimal level, which she loves. She can go to the gym. She has energy she said she's never had. I literally talked to her yesterday. She's super happy. Mm-hmm. Her lesions have softened. They've lessened. They are significantly less itchy. And we're working on these final pieces to hopefully get those to a place of as least as possible. And we've seen huge improvements in normalizing her liver values. As a whole, she is so super happy because she's gotten her life back and she's feeling so much better. And we didn't have to do it with a crazy restrictive diet either. So it is possible.
Love it. Thank you. And you have got a low stomach acid at home test for us. And I'll put the link in the show notes. But what can they find there what can they expect with that at home test?
It's a free test. All you need is some water and baking soda. That's it. You mix that together, it'll tell you the proportions, and you'll drink it, and it will help you identify whether you have enough stomach acid. It's important you do it first thing in the morning before you've eaten anything. And I would recommend, just in case a small number of people seem to have a bout of diarrhea after it about like 30 to 45 minutes later. So don't be running out to a meeting. Do it on like a Saturday or Sunday. It doesn't mean anything, but I prefer this over doing the betaine HCl test where you take an increasing number of betaine HCl, because if, God forbid, you do actually have H. pylori or you have an ulcer, I don't think it's smart to be throwing more acid into your stomach. So this will help you identify whether you have enough stomach acid. And like I said, that is a really critical first piece. I have all of my clients do this test, so I'm happy to share that with your audience.
Excellent. And where can they find you?
They can find me over at skinterrupt.com. So it's skin and interrupt. You smash those together and you got skinterrupt.com. You can also find me at jenniferfugo.com. And I am also the host of the Healthy Skin Show podcast. If you're looking for more skin related information, it's a really great show. You'll find tons of experts and research and all sorts of things. And I am on Facebook, but I'm on Instagram a ton. So if you want to see what my daily life is and the daily things I talk about, you can find me at Jennifer Fugo.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on, sharing your words of wisdom on this topic. I love your passion on this and really how you're just taking a completely different approach and digging, deeper into not just focusing on, in this case, the psoriasis and digging deeper and looking at the whole person. And yeah, thanks so much for coming on, Jennifer.
Thank you for having me.
Excited to have Shop AIP as the sponsor for this episode. And you can get a 10% discount when you go to shopaip.com. And at checkout, just enter in the coupon code GetPregnantPodcast, and you can start with the AIP diet right away. So that's shopaip.com and enter in GetPregnantPodcast at the checkout. Hey there, I regularly speak with 5 to 10 couples per week who are struggling to have their baby. And although we want to help everyone, we only have 2 spots available per month to work with us. So the Supercharge Your Fertility Discovery Call is for action takers, really people who are ready to move forward so they can finally have their baby. And if you're not ready and you wait, the risk is you'll need to wait 2 to 3 months for a spot to open up. So if you're seriously considering working with us, go to fabfertile.com and click on book a free call. Then you'll be all booked in and ready to spend 30 minutes to give you the action plan to getting pregnant naturally. That's fabfertile.com and click on book a free call. The Get Pregnant Naturally podcast, including show notes and links, provides information with respect to healthy living, nutrition, lab testing, and is intended for informational purposes only. The information provided is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, nor is it to be construed as such. We cannot guarantee that the information provided on the Get Pregnant Naturally podcast reflects the most up-to-date medical research. Information is provided without representation or warranties of any kind. Please consult a qualified physician for medical advice and always seek the advice of a qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding your health and nutrition program.